There's a specific kind of torture that happens entirely inside your skull, and nobody around you has any idea it's happening. You're sitting in a meeting, or lying in bed, or trying to focus on work, and inside your head there's a war happening. A voice replays that conversation from 3 days ago, analyzing every word you said, every response you got, wondering if you came across wrong, if they misunderstood you, if you should send a clarifying text. Another voice is already catastrophizing about tomorrow, running through 17 different scenarios of how things could go wrong, preparing arguments for conflicts that haven't happened yet, building elaborate defenses against imaginary attacks. Another voice is judging the fact that you're overthinking, telling you that normal people don't do this, that something's broken in you, that you should be able to just let things go. And beneath all of that noise, there's a quieter voice that's exhausted, that just wants one moment of silence, one breath where your mind isn't attacking itself. But that voice gets drowned out by the chaos, and the cycle continues, hour after hour, day after day, until you can't remember what it feels like to have a quiet mind. In 1612, Miyamoto Musashi stood on the shore of Gonryu Island preparing to fight the most anticipated duel in Japanese history. His opponent, Sasaki Kojiro, was considered invincible, a master swordsman whose technique was so refined that people traveled across the country just to watch him practice. The entire nation was watching this fight. The pressure was immense. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, 1 second of mental noise would mean death. And here's what makes this moment extraordinary. While Kojiro spent the morning in meditation, trying to calm his mind, trying to silence his thoughts through mental discipline, Musashi did something completely different. He showed up 3 hours late. Deliberately. And when he finally arrived, he didn't bow, didn't prepare, didn't perform any ritual. He picked up a wooden oar from the boat, carved it into a sword during the journey, and walked onto the beach with his mind completely silent. Not because he'd meditated or visualized or repeated affirmations, but because he understood something about the nature of inner chatter that modern psychology is only beginning to discover. You cannot silence the noise by fighting the noise. You silence it by removing the conditions that create it. Kojiro died on that beach, but not because Musashi was faster or stronger or more skilled. He died because his mind was full and Musashi's mind was empty. Kojiro spent the entire fight thinking, analyzing, predicting, reacting to the chatter in his head that was trying to protect him but was actually paralyzing him. Musashi's mind was void. Not blank, not forced into silence, but naturally quiet because he'd systematically removed every source of internal conflict. And what he discovered through 61 duels to the death became a system that works just as effectively for the battles happening in your mind right now as it did for the battles he fought with a sword. You're watching this video because the overthinking is killing you. Not literally, but in every way that matters. It's killing your relationships because you're always second-guessing what you said instead of being present. It's killing your career because you're paralyzed by analysis instead of taking action. It's killing your sleep because the moment your head hits the pillow, the chatter turns into a screaming match. And you've tried everything. You've tried meditation, but 5 minutes into sitting still, your mind explodes with noise. You've tried affirmations, but they feel fake and the chatter immediately argues with them. You've tried journaling, exercise, therapy, apps, breathing techniques. And some of them help for a little while, but the chatter always comes back, usually stronger, because you're fighting a symptom instead of addressing the cause. What Musashi understood is that inner chatter isn't a psychological problem that needs treatment. It's a structural problem that needs elimination. The noise in your head isn't random. It's being generated by specific conditions you're maintaining without realizing it. And once you remove those conditions, the chatter doesn't need to be fought. It simply stops. Before I show you the 3 steps Musashi used to create permanent mental silence, steps that have nothing to do with meditation or mindfulness or any of the techniques you've already tried, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell, because what I'm about to share with you is going to challenge everything you think you know about how the mind works. This isn't going to be comfortable information. You're going to resist it. Your overthinking mind is going to immediately start analyzing whether this is legitimate, whether you should trust it, whether you should keep watching or click away. That's the chatter doing what it does. Watch what happens in your head over the next few minutes. Notice how many times your mind tries to pull you away from what I'm saying. That awareness alone is the beginning of silence. Now drop a comment telling me this. When does your inner chatter get loudest? Is it before you go to sleep? During social situations? When you're trying to make decisions? When you're alone? Write it down. Say, my inner chatter is loudest when, and finish that sentence. Because the pattern of when your noise appears reveals exactly which of Musashi's 3 steps you need most. Do it now. I'll wait. Your comment might save someone else who's suffering in the exact same way. The first step is what Musashi called cutting the root, and this is going to upset you because it requires you to admit something you've been denying. Your overthinking isn't happening because your brain is broken or because you're anxious or because you have some chemical imbalance. It's happening because you're maintaining unresolved conflict. Somewhere in your life, probably in multiple places, you're trying to hold 2 opposing positions simultaneously. You want to quit your job, but you're terrified of instability. You want to end a relationship, but you're afraid of being alone. You want to speak your truth, but you're terrified of rejection. And as long as those conflicts remain unresolved, as long as you're trying to be 2 different people at the same time, your mind will never be quiet. Because the chatter is your consciousness trying to solve an equation that you keep refusing to solve. It's not attacking you. It's trying to help you. But it can't help you because you won't make a decision. Musashi's entire philosophy of swordsmanship was built on eliminating internal conflict before the fight even began. He would study an opponent for hours, sometimes days, and what he was looking for wasn't technique or weakness. He was looking for contradiction. For the gap between what the opponent wanted to project and what they actually were. And once he found that gap, the fight was over. Because a warrior operating from contradiction is already fighting themselves. They don't need an external opponent. Musashi understood that the same principle applied to his own mind. Every moment of hesitation, every flicker of doubt, every piece of mental noise was a signal that he was in contradiction somewhere. That he wanted something he wasn't acting on. That he feared something he wasn't confronting. That he was trying to be someone he wasn't. And his solution was brutal in its simplicity. Cut the root. Resolve the contradiction. Make the decision you've been avoiding. There's a guy named James who spent 2 years in absolute mental hell because of this exact issue. He was in a relationship that had been dead for 18 months. No intimacy, no real connection, just comfort and convenience and shared bills. But James wouldn't end it because he'd convinced himself he was being responsible, mature, considering her feelings. Meanwhile, his inner chatter was destroying him. Every conversation with his girlfriend generated hours of analysis afterward. Should I have been warmer? Was I too distant? Am I a terrible person for not loving her anymore? He couldn't sleep. He couldn't focus at work. He was drowning in noise. Then he read about Musashi's concept of cutting the root and realized something devastating. The chatter wasn't the problem. The chatter was trying to force him to see what he was refusing to see. He was in contradiction. He wanted to leave, but he was staying. And as long as that contradiction existed, his mind would never shut up because it was screaming at him to resolve the unsolvable equation. So he did what Musashi would do. He ended the relationship. Not cruelly, not impulsively, but decisively. And here's what happened. Within 3 days, the mental noise dropped by 90%. Not because the breakup was easy or painless, but because the contradiction was gone. His mind no longer had to maintain 2 opposing realities. It could finally rest. James told me later that he spent 2 years trying every technique to quiet his mind, and none of them worked because they were all addressing the symptom. The moment he addressed the cause, the moment he cut the root, the silence was immediate and permanent. Here's your first step, and it's going to require courage. Take out a piece of paper and write down every area of your life where you're in contradiction. Where you want one thing but you're doing another. Where you say you value something but your actions prove otherwise. Where you're pretending to be someone you're not. These contradictions are the roots of your inner chatter. Every single one of them is generating noise because your mind is trying to reconcile the irreconcilable. And here's what you need to understand. You cannot meditate your way out of contradiction. You cannot affirmation your way out of unresolved conflict. The only way to silence that specific type of noise is to cut the root. To resolve the contradiction. To make the decision you've been avoiding. Some of those decisions will be painful. Some will disappoint people. Some will require you to admit you were wrong about something important. But the alternative is living with that noise forever. And I promise you, the temporary pain of resolution is nothing compared to the permanent torture of contradiction. The second step is what Musashi called perceiving that which cannot be seen, and this is where most people's overthinking becomes truly insane. Because you're not just thinking about what's actually happening. You're thinking about what you imagine might be happening, what could happen, what people might think, what hidden meanings might exist beneath surface interactions. You're not responding to reality. You're responding to the ghost stories your mind is telling about reality. And those ghost stories multiply endlessly because they're not constrained by facts. They're only constrained by your imagination, and your imagination is infinite. Musashi trained a quality he called kan, which translates roughly to perception or intuitive awareness. But it wasn't mystical or supernatural. It was the ability to see what's actually in front of you without adding layers of interpretation, assumption, or projection. When Musashi looked at an opponent, he didn't see what he feared the opponent might do or what he hoped the opponent would do. He saw exactly what the opponent was doing in that precise moment. No more, no less. And that clarity eliminated 90% of the mental noise that destroys most fighters. Because when you're only dealing with what's actually happening, your mind has very little to process. It's only when you start dealing with what might be happening that the chatter explodes. Here's how this plays out in your daily life. You send a text to someone and they don't respond for 3 hours. And in those 3 hours, your mind creates 17 different narratives. They're mad at me. I said something wrong. They're losing interest. They're talking about me to someone else right now. They're purposefully ignoring me to teach me a lesson. Maybe they never liked me. Maybe this whole relationship is fake. And by the time they finally respond with a simple, sorry, was in a meeting, you've already lived through 17 different realities, none of which were real. That's not overthinking. That's ghost story generation. You're not thinking about what happened. You're creating fiction and then treating it like fact. And the more you do this, the more your mind learns to treat imagination as reality, and the chatter becomes deafening because you're now living in multiple simultaneous realities that all feel equally real. Musashi's training for eliminating ghost stories was ruthlessly simple. He only responded to what was observable. If an opponent's sword was raised, he responded to a raised sword. He didn't respond to what the raised sword might mean or what might happen next. Just the raised sword. And you need to apply that same discipline to your mental life. When someone doesn't text back, the observable reality is that they haven't texted back. That's it. Everything else you add to that, every story, every interpretation, every assumption, that's ghost generation. And ghost stories always create noise because they're unsolvable. You can't resolve something that doesn't exist. There's a woman named Rachel who nearly destroyed her career because of ghost story thinking. She was in a leadership position, and she noticed her boss had stopped including her in certain meetings. And instead of dealing with the observable fact, which was simply that she wasn't in those specific meetings, Rachel created an entire narrative. She decided her boss had lost confidence in her, was planning to replace her, was probably already interviewing her replacement, was telling other executives she wasn't leadership material. And this ghost story consumed her. She spent weeks anxious, unable to focus, overcompensating in weird ways, sending too many emails, volunteering for everything, trying to prove her value. Her performance actually dropped because she was so busy fighting ghosts that she stopped doing her actual job well. Finally, after a month of torture, she forced herself to do what Musashi would do. She went to her boss and addressed only the observable fact. I've noticed I'm not in the Thursday strategy meetings anymore. Can you help me understand why? And her boss looked confused and said, "Oh, we moved those meetings to a different time because of a schedule conflict, and I thought you had a standing commitment then, so I didn't want to make you change your schedule." It wasn't personal. It wasn't strategic. It was logistical. Rachel had spent a month in hell fighting a ghost that didn't exist. And the moment she dealt with observable reality instead of imagined reality, the noise stopped. Here's your second step. For the next 7 days, practice Musashi's perception discipline. Every time you notice your mind creating a story about what something means or what might happen, stop and ask yourself this question. What is observably, factually true right now, separate from any story I'm adding? If someone seems upset, The observable truth is that their facial expression changed. Everything else is story. If your boss gives you critical feedback, the observable truth is that they said specific words. Everything else is story. If you make a mistake, the observable truth is that a specific action had a specific result. Everything else, the meaning, the implications, the judgments, that's all story. And stories generate noise. Facts don't. When you train your mind to only respond to what's actually happening instead of what you imagine might be happening, the chatter volume drops dramatically because you've cut off the fuel supply. No ghosts, no noise. Right here, I need to pause and check something. Because I know thousands of people are watching this video, but I don't know if you're actually applying what I'm sharing or if you're just consuming information. And there's a huge difference. Consuming information feels productive but changes nothing. Applying information is uncomfortable but changes everything. So I want you to do something right now that proves to yourself that you're here to change, not just to watch. Scroll down to the comments and write this. The contradiction I need to cut is, and then finish that sentence with total honesty. Or write, the ghost story I keep telling myself is, and name the specific story. You don't need to write a paragraph. One sentence. But make it real. Make it specific. Make it true. Because when you externalize the thing that's creating noise in your head, when you name it publicly even in an anonymous comment, something shifts. The noise loses power. You see it clearly for the first time. And you're going to scroll through those comments and realize that hundreds of other people are fighting the exact same ghosts, carrying the exact same contradictions. That recognition, that shared struggle, it's proof you're not broken. You're just human. And humans who name their noise can silence it. Humans who hide from their noise get consumed by it. So comment now. Be specific. Be honest. I'll read it. And more importantly, you'll see it. And seeing it clearly is the beginning of cutting it away. Do it now. The third step is what Musashi called cutting thought itself, and this is the most advanced and most misunderstood principle in his entire system. Because after you've cut the roots of contradiction and eliminated the ghost stories, there's still one final source of noise that most people never address. The voice that comments on everything. The narrator that's constantly describing your experience as you're having it. The internal monologue that says things like, okay, I'm doing the thing now, this feels weird, am I doing this right? That person is looking at me, I wonder what they're thinking, I should focus, why can't I focus, I'm terrible at focusing. That voice. The one that's probably talking right now as you're listening to this. That voice isn't helping you. It's creating distance between you and your actual experience. It's putting a layer of language between you and reality. And as long as that narrator is running, you're not actually present. You're living in a description of life instead of life itself. Musashi called this state Mushin, which translates to no mind or empty mind. But he didn't mean unconscious or blank. He meant a mind that's so completely absorbed in what it's doing that there's no space left for commentary. When Musashi fought, there was no voice in his head narrating the fight. There was no thought of technique or strategy or outcome. There was only action and response, movement and countermovement, completely fluid, completely present, completely silent. And he discovered that this state of no mind wasn't just useful in combat. It was the natural state of human consciousness when you stop interfering with it. The narrator in your head isn't your true mind. It's a learned habit. A coping mechanism you developed years ago to try to control uncertain situations by describing them. But it doesn't actually give you control. It just gives you the illusion of control while destroying your ability to be present. Here's what this looks like in normal life. You're having a conversation with someone, and instead of actually listening to them, there's a voice in your head that's already preparing what you're going to say next, judging whether they're understanding you, monitoring whether you're coming across well, replaying what you just said to check if it was stupid. You're not in the conversation. You're in a commentary about the conversation. Or you're working on a creative project, and instead of being absorbed in the work, there's a voice that's constantly evaluating. Is this good? Would people like this? Have I been working long enough? Should I try something different? The narrator turns everything into a performance that's being judged, and that constant judgment is exhausting. It's noise. Musashi's method for cutting thought wasn't suppression or meditation. It was immersion. He would practice sword techniques for 8 hours straight, not thinking about the techniques, just doing them over and over until the narrator had nothing left to say. He would enter a state of such complete absorption that the commenting mind simply shut down because it wasn't needed. And you can access that same state, but not through the activities you think. Most people try to find it through meditation or relaxation, and those can work, but they're not the most direct path. The most direct path is through any activity that demands 100% of your attention. Any activity that's complex enough that you can't do it while simultaneously narrating it. There's a guy named Marcus who discovered this by accident. He'd been dealing with severe anxiety and overwhelming mental chatter for years. Tried therapy, tried medication, tried every mindfulness app available. Nothing created lasting silence. Then he took a welding class just because he needed a hobby. And the first time he struck an arc, the first time he had to focus on temperature and angle and speed while molten metal was inches from his hands, something extraordinary happened. The narrator shut up. Completely. For the first time in years, there was no voice commenting on his experience. There was just welding. Just complete absorption. Just presence. And when the class ended 2 hours later, he realized he'd gone the longest stretch without anxiety that he'd experienced in a decade. Marcus started welding every evening. Not because he wanted to become a welder, but because he'd found a doorway to Mushin. To that state of no mind where the narrator doesn't exist. And over time, something unexpected happened. The silence he accessed during welding started bleeding into the rest of his life. He'd be in a meeting and notice the narrator starting up, and he could choose to not engage with it the same way he didn't engage with it while welding. He'd be lying in bed and the chatter would start, and he could let it run without identifying with it because he now knew what real silence felt like. The welding wasn't the solution. It was the training ground. It taught his mind what presence actually feels like so he could recognize when he'd left it. Here's your third step, and it's not what you expect. Find one activity that demands complete absorption. Something that requires enough skill and attention that you cannot do it while also narrating your experience. It could be a physical skill like cooking, woodworking, climbing, martial arts. It could be creative like drawing, playing an instrument, writing fiction. It could be intellectual like solving complex math problems or learning a language. It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that it's difficult enough to fully occupy your mind. Then commit to doing that activity for at least 30 minutes every single day. Not to get good at it, not to accomplish anything, but to train the state of no narrator. To teach your mind what it feels like to exist without commentary. And once you know that feeling, once you can access it reliably in one area, you can start applying it everywhere else. You can be in a stressful conversation and notice the narrator starting to panic, and you can choose presence instead. You can be facing a difficult decision and notice the chatter trying to take over, and you can choose silence instead. The difference between someone who overthinks constantly and someone who has a quiet mind isn't that one person has better thoughts or more discipline or a calmer personality. It's that one person is still identified with the narrator and the other person has learned to exist without it. They've trained Mushin. They've cut thought itself by discovering that they're not the voice. They're the awareness beneath the voice. And once you realize that, once you experience even 5 minutes of existence without the narrator, you can never fully believe in it again. It's still there, it still speaks, but you know it's optional. You know you can choose silence. So here's what everything I've shared comes down to. Musashi spent his entire life in situations where mental noise meant death. And what he discovered wasn't a technique for managing the noise or coping with it or making it more pleasant. He discovered how to eliminate it at the source. Cut the root by resolving contradictions instead of maintaining them. Perceive what is instead of creating ghost stories about what might be. Cut thought itself by training absorption so complete that the narrator has no job left to do. These aren't meditation practices. They're not mindfulness exercises. They're structural changes to how you operate. And they work whether you believe in them or not because they address cause instead of symptom. Musashi died at 73 years old and his final written words were, "I regret nothing." Imagine having a mind so quiet that you reach the end of your life and there's no chatter about what you should have done differently, who you should have been, what you missed. Just complete peace with exactly what was. That level of silence is possible. Not as some mystical achievement that requires decades of meditation, but as a natural result of removing the three things that generate noise: contradiction, ghost stories, and identification with the narrator. Cut those three things, and what's left isn't effort. It's silence. Not forced silence, not meditated silence, but the natural silence that was always there underneath the noise. I want to leave you with a question that Musashi would ask if he were here. What are you protecting by maintaining the noise? Because the chatter in your head isn't random and it's not meaningless. It's serving a function. Maybe it's protecting you from taking action by keeping you stuck in analysis. Maybe it's protecting you from being present by keeping you distracted with commentary. Maybe it's protecting you from seeing truths you're not ready to face by drowning them out with ghost stories. Whatever it's protecting, that's what you need to confront. Because you can learn every technique in the world for managing overthinking, but if you're unconsciously using the overthinking as protection from something deeper, it will never stop. The noise will adjust, adapt, find new forms. But when you identify what you're protecting and you choose to face it directly, the noise loses its purpose. And something without purpose simply stops. Subscribe to this channel right now if you haven't already, because we've only scratched the surface of what Musashi understood about the mind. Turn on that notification bell so you don't miss the next video. And then do one final thing for me. Go to the comments and tell me which of the 3 steps hit you hardest. Say, I need to cut the root because, or I need to stop creating ghost stories because, or I need to train Mushin because, and finish that sentence honestly. And then tell me the one specific action you're going to take in the next 24 hours to begin that work. Not eventually, not when you feel ready. 24 hours. Because that's how silence is built. Not through understanding, but through action. Not through thinking about the steps, but through taking them. I'll see you in the next video. Now go create the silence you've been searching for. It's been waiting for you underneath the noise this entire time.